Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today is a very special episode. It is the 100th episode of Highly Respected. So I am honored we have lasted this long. I have not been carted off by Joe Biden's secret police. I have not been canceled by YouTube yet. We've had some other cancellations and some other deplatformings, but not from the main platform of YouTube. I've not, so knock on wood, I'm still here. we'll see how long that lasts, but I'm honored by the thousands, it's likely millions of people who tune in every week and enjoy the episode or enjoy the shows, enjoy me talking for an hour or so and rambling on. I'm honored to have you guys support. It's a privilege to be here. So we're going to keep going up until we'll even have Highly Respecteds in the FEMA camps they're going to put us in. So they can't cancel Highly Respected whatsoever. So just keep knowing we're going strong. Some people were saying, are you going to do something special for Highly Respected's 100th episode? And yes, we do have a very special guest. That very special guest is our number one guest. It is the smartest, most brilliant, most handsomest guest we could get. And that, of course, is Scott M. Greer. Yes, it's just me talking again this week. We didn't have any special guests. I didn't know necessarily what to do for our 100th episode besides thanking the audience for tuning in every week and enjoying the show and giving a shout out that we'll be continuing to do this on. It's just me talking today. Sorry to all those people who are going to be disappointing and tuning out, but you should stick in because we've got an incredible episode. Of course, you know, we always have an incredible episode every week, but we've definitely going to have a great one for the 100th episode. So sit back and enjoy your commute home from work, you know, because of course you're listening live at 5 p.m. like all the truly respected listeners. So here we go. We've got a couple different topics today. Like we always have a couple different topics, but the main topic today is a lot of people are, you know, once again saying Trump is finished. You know, people have been saying this ever since summer of 2015. You know, local man nervously says Trump is finished for the 100th time. These jokes were being made in the Republican primary. Trump's still here. People were saying this in the general election of 2016. He's still here. Every week when he was president, people kept saying that, especially in the 2020 election. He was still there. Even after January 6th, people said he was finished. And, you know, the evidence for that was much better. I mean, he's getting deplatformed from everywhere. May face criminal charges. Another impeachment trial ahead. You know, he got impeached one time. People said he's finished. No, he came rolling back. And he is still here. And he's still getting over 50% of the support from Republican voters. But people continue to want to say he's done. He's gone. We're thinking he's over. And there's two separate events that are causing this or developments that are happening. One is the January 6th committee, which had, you know, Liz Cheney read these blockbuster text messages from Mark Meadows that were sent to Mark Meadows. And their January 6th committee is promising federal charges against people and is promising to blow open the whole scandal that surrounded the alleged coup that tried to take place on January 6th. And people are thinking that like Trump may be arrested and carted off to jail over this. We'll see about that. We'll get to that in a moment. And the second is a lot of prominent conservative pundits. They were doing this before Liz Cheney captured the headlines on CNN and MSNBC with her committee hearing, or her reading at the committee hearing. They're just saying Trump is done, and they're finding various angles and news developments that are showing that Trump is done. And of course, I'm going to argue that Trump is not done. You know, I argued this in last month when all these conservative pundits were saying after the Virginia race that this proves the GOP is moving on beyond Trump. That they no longer need him. This shows a party free of Trump and how successful it can be. And I wrote an incredible Revolver article disputing that and disproving that. So some of these points are going to be echoed again here, but it is necessary to continue to repeat this and show where we are because people are not learning this lesson. They keep going on with these talking points. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the January 6th committee, what it's doing, what's it about, Why was everyone talking about it this week? And the big news was this week, as I referenced earlier, was Liz Cheney was at a hearing. It was like late at night. It was like at 7 or 8 around the time that she was reading this, and the whole news media just like stopped. Every like New York Times or CNN or MSNBC reporter, I was like saying it was like, oh, this is a historic moment. What Liz Cheney is doing so brave. I am shocked at what happened with the nation. And what she was reading was these text messages that were sent by various Fox News hosts and various personalities to Mark Meadows, telling Meadows that Trump needs to have a firmer denunciation. And Laura Ingraham texted, I think Brian Kilmeade texted, and Don Jr. texted, and I think like a few other Fox News personalities. The stuff they mainly honed in on was Laura Ingraham, because Laura Ingraham was like saying like, this is terrible, this is bad, everything the Trump patriots have worked for, it's all gone, blah, blah, blah. We need a firmer denunciation from Trump. Like, Trump needs to really call this out. And Mark Meadows like, I'm trying. And then later that night, all the news media, when they were honing in on this, wanted to point this out, that Laura Ingraham at night was downplaying the alleged insurrection. She was just saying are blaming saboteurs or agents provocateur among the bunch. Like, or even saying that maybe Antifa was involved. She was like saying these things. They exaggerated what she was saying. I mean, the main thing she did that night was downplaying and saying like, look, this is bad or whatever, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And people really wanted to, have the point that it was another 9/11, or even worse than 9/11, as Huffington Post White House press correspondent, who's SV Dada, I think, or it's an Indian guy, who keeps pointing out. And even though he's supposed to be an objective reporter, he's arguing with people saying January 6th was somehow worse than 9/11. The media is very mad about Fox News and their like cozy relationship with Meadows and them sending text messages. And they show that this is like the height of hypocrisy, and how dare they allow this attack or somehow encourage this attack on our democracy. And there's CNN hosts who are demanding that Fox News be expunged from the White House Press Correspondents Association. They're no longer allowed to ask questions to the White House, and they need to be kicked out because they're an enemy of democracy. So once again, not only are they trying to say that Trump is finished, but Fox News is finished too, because they're going to be hauled in before the January 6th committee, and the January 6th committee is just going to, wag their finger and say, no, you are done. And some conservatives were going in on this, like Jonah Goldberg and Stephen Hayes, who, they've been around a long time. They're two big conservative columnists. Both of them used to be very present on Fox News back in the 2010s, pre-Trump. They haven't been on in a while, and then they made a lot of news by saying, we quit Fox News. But I think, as I pointed out at the time when they did this, their contracts were likely based per hit. Like, they got paid based on how many times they went on. They would get like a set number of money of compensation per TV hit they did, and they haven't been doing many TV hits at all, so it's likely not any real loss. Or otherwise their contracts were coming up and they knew they were not going to get renewed, and they're just like, oh yeah, we're leaving on principle, of course, as people always want to say. And they were denouncing this and stuff. So there's this impression that not only that Trump is going to go away, that Fox News is on the decline, that it's going to be taken out. And, Jonah Goldberg and Stephen Hayes are going to storm into Sean Hannity's booth and Tucker Carlson's booth. And they're like, listen here, sir, you're an enemy of democracy. The people want you gone. They're like, no, don't tell me a people of democracy. Like, get out of here, bum. And then Jonah Goldberg begins hosting the show, and everyone is thrilled to turn in. Instead of Tucker Carlson tonight, they have Jonah Goldberg tonight, where he's just talking about a stupid dog, and him talking about how fucking smart he is, even though he went to one of the worst liberal arts colleges in America. And then him condescending to his audience and telling them they're idiots and they need to accept the globalist order. Yeah, that's not going to work. But there is this, what's happening with January 6th, it speaks to this hope that they need to de-Trumpify the Republican Party. Liz Cheney has been very open about this, and so has Adam Kinzinger, and so has been all these other Never Trump Republicans, that they want the Republican Party purged of its Trumpist elements. And Never Trumpers has been saying this really since 2015. And they've been trying to do their hardest to purge these elements, but to no real results. Even they can't even get people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, silenced or kicked out of Congress. They know they can't do anything about them, and they know that they're being assigned to a greater irrelevancy at the same time that they're getting more respect from mainstream outlets, and they're being able to be published in the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Atlantic, which, in 2013, those opportunities weren't necessarily there for them, but now they are. So the more that they become respected by the media and the press, the less relevant and influential they are on the people that they're supposed to represent or supposed to speak for or supposed to be allied with. Yet they still hope that they can come back to power and that people will be like, wow, you are so right, Jonah Goldberg or David Frum. And the Republican Party is like, please pick all our leaders. We're just so sad that we allowed this to happen. Please lead our party again. I know you don't have any charisma or leadership, but just lead us to the promised land. And, maybe if they deign to do this, they will come down and lead us. That's what they still think. And they hope that January 6th is this vehicle. That's why last week, there was all these hopes that not only is it going to bring down Trump, but it's going to bring down Fox, because they view these as the enemies in their quest to restore their power among the Republican Party and of the conservative movement. Yet they are going to be sorely mistaken. There is no way the January 6th committee is going to de-Trumpify the party. Liz Cheney is hinting at federal charges for Trump, but I don't even know how that works, because he was doing this as president. Like, I'm not a legal scholar in this. This is like a complicated matter of whether you can file federal criminal charges to the president after he's out of office. Generally, the thinking is you have to impeach them and remove them from office, and then at that time you can prosecute them for crimes committed as a presidency. That is my understanding of this, but I guarantee you that there is some legal workaround. There is no precedent for this. The only time that they would have ever done this was against Richard Nixon. He resigned from office before being impeached. They were likely going to, ensure that he could have criminal charges placed against him. But Gerald Ford pardoned him, and that ended the whole matter, and he didn't have to worry about that. But we have no other president who's faced federal charges relating to his time as president after he is gone from the presidency. So I don't know if they would have to impeach him again, and then the Senate approved the impeachment and approved the removal, I guess, but he's no longer president. And so I don't know necessarily how it would work, because it may have to come from Congress. It's not necessarily, I don't think the Department of Justice can just announce federal charges as the president due to his behavior as president. And, it is offering up a precedent. I mean, they never did this to George W. Bush for what he did in Iraq. They never did this to, as I said, they never did this to Richard Nixon, but that's because he had a pardon. They could do this to a wide variety of presidents. It really is, moving to a banana republic situation where, you can just prosecute your political enemies after they're out of power. And then the Democrats are able to whip up their media echo chamber and their institutions that they control to tell the people, this is good and right. We have to do this to defend our democracy. They love talking about defending our democracy, and everything that they suggest for defending our democracy is about eroding free speech, ensuring that they have permanent political power, putting the federal government in charge of state and local elections, putting the federal government in charge of state and local police, then greater centralization, greater control put in Washington, D.C. That's all for, democracy, folks. And that's what they continue to say. But I digress on that matter. But is January 6th going to work? Even with the criminal charges, they're not going to go forward with it. I think there are so many local prosecutors that have tried to do charges relating to his business dealings prior to him being president, and fundraising and that type, financial matters. The district, there have been several DAs in New York City that have wanted to do this. Even the Attorney General of New York has like threatened that she's gonna prosecute Trump, but they pull away. They pull away because I think they know that they're crossing a threshold that they don't want to necessarily cross yet. Because they know that's like a precedent that they're setting. I mean, Democrats have been bold in setting precedents, especially when it comes to punishing the random comments made by Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and what may be possibly Lauren Boebert, that they've gotten removed from their committee assignments over just things that they said. No criminal behavior, which usually to be removed from committee assignments, that's usually like you've been involved in like serious sexual misconduct or in corruption or something. Like if you look at the list of people that it's been happened to, that's it. And then they have, Paul Gosar released an anime video. It's like something doesn't fit here. But they're willing to do that. But, charging the president you hate on, especially with trumped up federal charges, which is, it's not really, there is no clear sign of conspiracy or a real insurrection plot, even though they keep pointing to Mark Meadows' PowerPoint slideshow on this. And it's like, hey, look at this. Like, this shows that they had a coup plot. They even had a PowerPoint and a slideshow. Wow. And then it had all the markers and everything. Yeah, no, it's not going to work. The FBI has struggled to build conspiracy cases against people who even went into the building. And they've been said that they're like, yeah, we see no large, real long-term planning for this. We see no real plan, real operation here. It's just like people ran in, there was no clear coordination or anything like that. And they've said that about groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and other militia types that were involved in going into the building. Now, imagine how they're going to build that case against the President of the United States. And they're going to say, like, well, his words inspired this, which that's once again opening up a major Pandora's box over, if the president says something and, some random person, acts out or says they acted out on what he said, that's a big crime. That's something there. Maybe could a soldier who commits a war crime in one of these places we've got soldiers and, they're being prosecuted and like saying, well, I was just listening to what the president said and, I'm just following him. Does that open up the president to charges? They have to worry about these things. But even with this stuff that is, very murky territory about the federal charges, even like the stuff you would think are more clear cut, like the state charges relating to, the alleged shady business dealings that he's done, they have shied away from that. I don't think they're going to want to charge Trump because they're worried about making him a martyr. And he would definitely become a martyr if he was charged with something. I've said the only two things that will stop Trump from running for office again in 2024 is, health crisis or he's arrested. And even with the arrest, I would think that would make him more popular among Republican base because it would turn him into a martyr. And there's been cases like that, elsewhere in the world where a leader has been arrested and then that made him more popular among his base. A good example of that is the former president of Brazil, Lula, who very popular among his left-wing base, among the masses. He is like a terrible thinker. I want to get that across, but he was arrested on corruption charges, and they did that in order so he couldn't run for president again. But his like popularity has increased with his legal troubles, and that turned him into a martyr figure and it made him in some ways more powerful. Now, it did prevent him from running for president in the year he wanted to run for president. I believe this was 2017. It was the year Bolsonaro became president. It did prevent that. I forget if Bolsonaro was elected in 2017 or 2018, but you know what I'm saying. And it did prevent that, and it would likely prevent Trump from running for president. I'm pretty sure there are laws saying you can't run for president from a jail cell. Maybe they'll challenge that, but he will become even more popular among that base. And every Republican presidential candidate will promise to release Trump and pardon him and like welcome him into the White House over whatever happens to him. And they really don't want that. That'll energize this. And I also do think they do have a fear that the Trump masses could, be activated to do something even worse than January 6th. And they feel that may, like, arresting Trump may trigger such an event. I don't know necessarily if that would happen, but I do believe that Trump would be more of a martyr and those people would be more loyal to him. It would prevent him from running for president, but they may create a worse situation out of that. And the second, I think they're worried about the precedent. They're just like, we don't really have good charges here. This is obviously a political prosecution. They're perfectly willing to do political prosecutions. I think the contempt charges that they filed against both Steve Bannon and Mark Meadows shows that they're, trying to run January 6th as a political prosecution, and they would like to, prosecute Trump. But I do think they're more leery of it than they are. I think if they wish they could do that, but when the line comes, when it's time to act, I think they hesitate and they pull away from it. And so that's why I don't think federal charges are going to happen against Trump. January 6th serves an important role. In my opinion, I think that what January 6th is going to operate is their only campaign mechanism. It's going to be the only thing they're going to campaign on in 2022. Democrats have absolutely nothing to campaign on. Inflation? No. Economy? No. COVID? It's continuing. Biden promised to end it. And, in last spring and summer, he's like, it's over. We're no longer wearing masks. You're vaxxed. Like, we're returning to normal. But due to the paranoia of Fauci and the libtard base and all these other people, they've returned back to paranoia and fear. And they're all doing mass theater again. And they're passing these vax mandates that, threaten to upend the economy and are, people are getting hesitant about. That's another thing. It's like if they actually implement these vax mandates, like the economic situation can get worse. So they can't campaign on the economy, can't campaign on gas prices, even though they're trying to say, oh, gas has gone down 7 cents since the high of early November. All right, let's go. It's like, yeah, but how is gas compared to when Trump was office? It looks terrible. Not a lot of this stuff is, it is true that some of the stuff is out of Biden's hands, but Biden, and his media enablers were promising, the land of milk and honey if he became president. COVID would be over, the economy would be roaring back, everything would be grand, and crime would end. Everything is the opposite, and also crime wave is happening. Several cities are hitting murder records. Like Philadelphia hit its murder record like 2 months before, like almost 2 months before the year's end. And Philadelphia had really bad crime in the late 90s or early 90s rather. Late 80s, early 90s, when crime was at its peak, our murder rates were at its peak, and it just exceeded its murder record. Several other cities are seeing murder records hit as well. Crime is getting worse, and people are noticing it. People, like if they drive in the city, they're noticing more car breakings and carjackings. So they can't campaign on crime. Immigration, we continue to have a border crisis. Every month brings at least over 100,000 immigrants every month, and some months are having record-breaking numbers of 200,000 immigrants. And those are just ones we catch. There's tens of thousands of more we're not catching. So they can't say, the border's a mess, crime's a mess, economy's a mess, inflation's continuing to rise, and it could get even worse. We're looking like a joke on the world stage. Even though I like Biden pulling out of Afghanistan, that hurt him in the polls. So, and on the legislative front, Democrats did pass this infrastructure thing, but that's nothing. That is not enough to campaign on. That is not enough for Democrats to say, look, we've got this all handled. Like, we got past infrastructure. But their other big part, the Build Back Better budget bill, it keeps facing hurdles and setbacks. Just this week, the Senate parliamentarian announced that they cannot have any amnesty proposal in the bill. They've tried 3 times to put one in, and each time the Senate parliamentarian is like, no, you can't do this. And just as a refresher, the Build Back Better bill is getting passed through a different mechanism than, normal bills, or a different way than normal bills. It's getting past the reconciliation process, which only requires a simple majority in the Senate, but the bill has to be found to pertain narrowly and directly to the budget. And the parliamentarian keeps saying that all these left-wing wish items are just like, no, amnesty has nothing to do with the budget. And that could potentially kill the bill, because they could reinsert amnesty in the bill against the parliamentarian's wishes and risk losing the support of moderate Democrats who are already not thrilled with the bill. So all these things are happening. They don't have a legislative agenda to campaign on. They have no achievements to campaign on. Things have gotten worse since Trump left, noticeably worse in pretty much every way you can look at. And, Biden promised when he got into office that he would effectively end COVID. And a year later, everyone's still masked up. In the grocery stores, people are still panicking. And, the economy is not getting back. We're having massive labor shortages and just other things. Like, we're not returning to normal. Like, Biden promised a return to normalcy, and we've had an exaggeration of abnormalcy. Like, abnormalcy has been inflamed and extended with this. So this is a joke that they would actually think that, like, anything is like, your life is far more abnormal now than it was probably even in 2020. And in many cases, your life is worse, even though we had the stricter lockdowns at that time. So they have nothing to campaign on besides painting Republicans as the insurrectionist party. And look how evil they are. They're threatening to overthrow our democracy. They're the Proud Boy party. That's all they have to offer in the 2020 campaign cycle. They have nothing else. So that's what they're going to run on, and they hope the January 6th committee can embarrass the Republicans, that they can haul in, prominent Republican leaders and say that they're being held in contempt of Congress, and Trump is being held on federal charges. They are a threat to democracy, and that is their only campaign pitch. It didn't work for Terry McAuliffe in the Virginia gubernatorial race. Even though Virginia is close to D.C. and people in Northern Virginia are a part of the small demographic that would continue to care about January 6th. It didn't work for him. It's not going to work for Democrats in 2022. People in Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, these people are not going to give a shit about January 6th. Come November 2022. Like, this is not going to be on their list of matters to concern them. And all Democrats are going to offer is this stuff because they're going to have nothing else to campaign on. And it's likely it's going to be a blowout. But that's why they're so fixated on January 6th, is because they have nothing else to attack Republicans with. Every other issue that they want to focus on is an embarrassment and shows how idiotic their policies are. I mean, and they can't get anything through Congress. So it's like, what good are you doing? So there's going to be a level, and, there's a lot of anger and frustration out there. Republicans are polling better right now in a, head-to-head matchup for the 2022 midterms than at any point in a very long time. And I think a lot of that anger is going to continue to build up, and it's going to reflect in the midterm results. And Democrats are just going to talk about QAnon shaman and the Proud Boys and, going on these grandstand remarks about how congressmen feared for their lives on January 6th. And it's just not going to work out. It's not going to pan out. But that's all they have. So that's why they're fixated on it right now. I mean, January 6th, and you could even see why the media and Democrats are focusing in on this, because they're struggling with the Build Back Better bill, and that's their chief priority, and that is a big priority for them, but they're losing hope that it can ever pass. So they're now directing all this energy to that committee, the stupid January 6th committee. Now on to conservatives saying Trump is over. I mean, everyone wants to say this. They said it after, as I said before, they said this after, Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia, and they continue to say it now. But for whatever reason, there's like a consensus emerging. Like all these people seem to have been in communication to like say, "Oh yeah, it's time to declare Trump is over." And Eric Erickson, Matt Lewis, and Jonah Goldberg are the three that I saw that were really into this, saying this. Jonah Goldberg wrote a whole column about it. Matt Lewis wrote a column about it. I didn't read Matt Lewis's column, and I just skimmed Jonah Goldberg's column. I'm not going to read the full thing. I already know what they were saying. And Eric Erickson had a tweet about this. Now, if you look at their arguments, they're, stupid. Eric Erickson was like saying, like, I think Trump is losing a lot of support. And why did he say this? He said this because Trump is only getting near 60% of support for 2024. When Republican voters are asked who do they want in 2024, nearly 60% say Trump. And he's like, well, this is a marked decline since 2020. In 2020 it was over 90%. This is showing that in a year this number is going to continue to go down. This is such a stupid point. And when these polls were being asked in 2020, Trump was the president, and it was there was some type of primary going on, and the media was trying to say, look at this person we've got. They had all these losers running against Trump, and none of them were getting anywhere, and they were all jokes. But the media kept giving them profiles and like saying they could challenge Trump, and Trump got like 97% in the primary against three challengers. And they're still doing this again with like thinking that Liz Cheney or Chris Christie or whoever can join forces and take down Trump in a 2024 primary. So, long-standing point, or, long run around to getting to the point, is that in 2020, Trump was the president. Trump was obviously going to run again, or was running. And so Republicans were like, yeah, 90% was like, yeah, let's stick with our president. That's a pretty typical response. 60% of those Republican voters after, the president getting deplatformed, impeached a second time, and, the whole media saying he's an enemy to democracy, and the fact that they're not hearing that Trump is not in the news as much anymore because he's kicked off social media. They're not paying attention to him as much. And yet still roughly 60% want him president. And you also need to note that's an increase over polling from the rest of the year. Most of the rest of the year, it's just been around low 50s, around 50%. If it's getting up to near 60%, that shows a huge increase. And you have to also look at who else, at the other Republicans. Is there some Republican who has 20% and is continuing to gain? No. Like most polls show most Republicans barely cracking double digits. Only Republicans who I've seen in any polls crack double digits has been Mike Pence and Ron DeSantis. And usually it's Mike Pence who gets more support and is more often to crack double digits than Ron DeSantis. So like Trump has over 40 points higher support than those two, than his closest competitor. And there's no way that how is that competitor going to narrow the difference? No one ever says this. In fact, I think people are pining more for Trump now after they're seeing how terrible Biden is. And they're like, I wish Trump was here. That usually happens when presidents leave and they're like, wow, this is really bad. I wish we had the last president. Things were much better on that. And that's definitely going to help Trump in that regard. So that's just like a stupid point. And these people are wishful. And also, all three of these political commentators were wrong as hell in 2016. And the whole conservative commentariat, who are all saying declaring Trump is dead or is gone, is finished. In 2016, they predicted Trump wouldn't even win a primary. And they always obsessed over every little gaffe and every little move in the 2016 primary and said, Trump is finished. And none of these people lost a job or lost any income for being idiots in 2016. And we continue to hear their stupidity going into 2022. So, there's no punishment for being wrong. And they're just going to continue to be wrong up until the presidential election in 2024. Jonah Goldberg had a column, with a column it was able to give off more points than Eric Erickson was in one tweet. And it was simple. He was like saying, oh, Trump's endorsements aren't mattering as much. He was like, Mo Brooks, he got his Trump's endorsement in Alabama, but there's another candidate that's catching up to him. And there's just, he's not doing well with his endorsements. And, he's just done. I think his influence is slipping. And it's like, if that was true, every Republican would just no longer worry about getting Trump's endorsement. They would just openly criticize Trump because, his influence doesn't matter, nor do they need his endorsement. But every Republican candidate in a primary, in a tough primary, goes and begs for Trump's endorsement no matter what. And the fact that all these and it's very weird, like people were not going to kiss the ring of George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush, when they were out of office to get their endorsements. This has never happened. I think I don't know if Reagan was giving endorsements in primaries when he was out of office. He was not in, good health when he left, and I don't think he was really doing that anymore. But, it's, there's hard to think of, a political figure where their endorsement, besides Obama, Democrats really sought his endorsement in primaries, but not to the same extent as Trump. And the fact that all these people are desperately begging for his endorsement in primaries, and people always tout that if they get an endorsement, it's their primary pitch in a primary. That shows how influential and prominent Trump is. Like, there is nobody else with this clout. And, people are just trying to read what they want in the tea leaves. Trump's endorsements, some of those people lost even when he was president or didn't poll well when he was, there. Think about it, the Alabama Republican primary. He endorsed Luther Strange. Strange lost to Roy Moore. That stuff even happened when he was president. So they always want to say, it's like, oh, this person he endorsed Trump, this person lost. Oh, Trump, Trump's magic touch no longer exists anymore. That's not the case. And a lot of these people who are going to get endorsed by Trump, especially against people he hates, are going to win their seats. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them are. And it will be a key part in their victory if they do win due to Trump's endorsement. Now I'm going to move on to a favorite topic I have of discussing possible 2024 Republican presidential candidates. And somebody asked me a question. It's a cognitive elite person from in the IQ supplements, which you all would be able to read if you signed up for the IQ supplements at highlyrespected.substack.com. I'm going to incorporate that here in a bit, but I want to remind people of how good Trump is, or how much he better compares to other Republicans. And he got into some hot water last week when he talked about people who control the media and Congress. So Trump said that Jews run the New York Times, and also Jews no longer love Israel, is that evangelicals love Israel more. And he's been talking about how Israel controls Congress and other things. He's actually been kind of going on a Buddish Trump arc when it comes to Israel, because he did so much for Israel. I mean, he is very obvious. He's like, on this regard, he can say, I'm the most pro-Israel president there's ever been. And on that regard, he can be, there's some accuracy to that, but none of them showed much love for him or much loyalty to him. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu was one of the first people to congratulate Joe Biden around the time they declared him the winner. I think it was on November 7th. He was one of the first people to congratulate him, and Trump remembered that, one of the first world leaders to do that. And, a lot of these other people weren't very loyal, but I mean, he made a very good point about the Jewish relationship with Israel, is that, American Jews are no longer caring about Israel, is that this is more of a motivational issue for evangelical Christians, which is what he pointed out. He said evangelical Christians love Israel more than Jews do. And if you're looking at polls and looking at how this is a voting factor among Republicans, that's true. I mean, we've always talked about it's like, oh, it's just the donors who really care about Israel and stuff. And there are a lot of Republican donors who seem to care about Israel much more than America or any other issue. But it's also a lot of voters care about it too. And it's a lot of these evangelical voters. And most of these evangelical voters are pretty good on Black Lives Matter, immigration, other things. If you look at polling and religious denomination, white evangelicals perform much better on these polls, are much more keyed on these questions, according to polls, than any other religious group. And they are really strong Israel supporters for very complicated reasons that are beyond the purview of this particular podcast episode, but we'll discuss in the future. So he's just correctly talking about that, and obviously the whole media is calling Trump an anti-Semite and yada, 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 and just going off this. But this is a reminder that Trump does have very good instincts. The problem is he gets pushed into other ways. He gets off the beaten path. But no other Republican vying for the presidency would dare say these things in an interview. He would never even think these things. He's like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Everyone loves Israel. Like, he would have no candor on this issue. But Trump is very open about it. He's like, yeah, I do so much for Israel, but the Jews, they don't love me. This type of comment is like, that's some type of honesty, especially about how Israeli lobby works and other groups, that works in this country. And also the fact that polls are showing that a lot of American Jews don't really care about Israel anymore, and their identity is changing. I mean, there's so much intermarriage, and a lot of these guys aren't even, a lot of people who are half Jewish are no longer bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah anymore. So they no longer do this type of stuff. And yeah, he's just correctly pointing this out. But could you imagine Ron DeSantis or Josh Hawley or any of these other people saying these type of things? No, they don't. And that's one thing is like Trump's instincts are so much better than any other Republican candidate. And he's the only person who can say things that no one else will say, that no one else dare say, and politically incorrect things. And that if any other Republican said these type of things, their career would be over. And that's why he presents a hope that no other candidate has. And he has the level of charisma and the level of connection and dedication among Republican voters that no one else can match. And that's why he's still the leader. I mean, you want, the Punish Trump arc could be amazing. Like, just think of this, like, of all the people who call out about the lack of, he would not care about earning some support. He'd be much more politically incorrect. He could return to the 2016 form that we all felt, we all wanted from Trump. And yeah, that's like no other Republican candidate is going to be as keyed as Trump, as red-pilled as Trump in 2024. No one else is going to be as based. I'm going to have to start. We will throw in based here every now and then, but I'm trying to replace it with keyed. We'll see how it works out for many reasons. So, looking at this statement, this is like why we like Trump. It's like this type of candor, this type of openness, this willingness to go places that no one else will ever see, and having pretty solid instincts on a lot of issues, willing to question things that no other Republican will. That's why we like him, and that's why he's still the best. But I'm going to go into a couple other questions about, these challengers, because I caught a little bit of flack last week for, a mild criticism of DeSantis, which I always regularly do, but I want to go to that. But the first thing is I want to bring in a question that was presented by a member of the Cognitive Elite. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highlyrespected.substack.com. This one comes from Johnny Chungus. I don't think that's his real name, but he's what he's asked me. He's like, hey Scott, recently our favorite baseball crank, Dan McLaughlin, he has his face superimposed on a baseball making a soy jack, and Dan McLaughlin for some reason feels that's a way to present himself to the world. And he said, parentheses, who made the Buckley, Reagan, DeSantis comparison I asked you about last week, said that Glenn Youngkin would be the strongest GOP candidate. Oh, on this matter is I promise that one day I'll do a Buckleyite or a podcast on Buckley, but I'll answer that question with this as well. Said that Glenn Youngkin would be the strongest GOP candidate in 2024, even more so than DeSantis, who he has second. How would someone like Youngkin cut or play out versus a generic Dem? And why do populist think people like Dan and laser icons on Twitter have such arbitrary and random definitions of electability? So that's a lot to unpack there with, DeSantis. And I'll first start off with the DeSantis thing. Is Dan McLaughlin, I mean, all these are like Dan McLaughlin. There's two different things here. Dan McLaughlin, recently in the last month or so said, out of all the presidential candidates who have run in the Republican Party, going back to the Bushes, Dole, McCain, Romney, Trump, all these people, the most Buckleyite of all are compared to them. Ron DeSantis is the most Buckleyite since Ronald Reagan. And some people, when they heard that, because there's this impression that Ron DeSantis is this hardcore national populist who is an enemy of the establishment. And there's no way that he is, George H.W. Bush and Bush being less Buckleyite than Ron DeSantis. That's outrageous. There's no way you could believe that. But what he meant by that is not that Ron DeSantis is more establishment. Buckleyite conservative means something different. This means like the traditional conservatism espoused by National Review, which didn't necessarily take over the party establishment. The party establishment's been heavily influenced by it. There's a lot of ideas that it's taken over, that the party mainstream and party establishment has taken from National Review and that type of Buckleyite crowd. But they are not the same thing. There are differences between it. I mean, the party establishment mainly just cares about their own power and moving things along and being business first, which isn't necessarily the Buckleyite thing. There are these corny things about Buckleyism that keeps it from being entirely establishment GOP. And when you're looking at this, what he really means is that by standard conservative, Ron DeSantis is more like a standard conservative than any other Republican presidential candidate or nominee since Reagan. And that is undoubtedly true. Like, this is the thing. Like, DeSantis isn't really a national populist. He just imitates a lot of Trump mannerisms. He knows that immigration plays well. He knows this issue of censorship plays well. He knows critical race theory plays well. But he, at heart, and the people around him and the people he would hire in administration are the same people who staff Heritage Foundation or at home at National Review. There has to be, when people at National Review love you and think that you should run for president and should be the presidential candidate, that's a sign that you're not actually a genuine, like you're a 100% nationalist or national populist. Now, I want to say this. I give a lot of criticism from Ron DeSantis. I like him as a governor. He does a lot of good things. We praise him as the governor when he's at the governor position, but people have this idea of Ron DeSantis that is completely at odds with reality. When you look at him and when you look at what people on Twitter say about Ron DeSantis, and there's all these different people. It's like, populist types, dissident right types, normie conservatives who love DeSantis. They all think like DeSantis is going to day one, like outlaw CNN and arrest all journalists and outlaw capitalism and institute national populist economic system. He's going to shut down big tech and arrest like Mark Zuckerberg and Parag, the new CEO of Twitter. And he's going to allow us all in there. And he is just going to destroy the left and he's going to be this epic caudillo type. And it's like, that's just not how it is with reality. I mean, he's like a standard conservative. He would bring in Heritage Foundation people. I mean, he'd be probably okay policy-wise compared with a lot of other Republicans, but you couldn't necessarily trust him because he's not instinctually based like Trump is. He knows that those issues play well, and he's being very smart and appealing to them. But to think that he's going to be the base dictator of our dreams, it's just nonsensical. And all these people use like weird criticisms of Trump who are extremely like pro DeSantis. They're like, Trump never pardoned Julian Assange. It's like, well, it's even less realistic to think that Ron DeSantis would pardon Julian Assange because Ron DeSantis is much more of a hawk than Trump is. And and the people who wanted Assange arrested would have a greater sway over Ron DeSantis than they would with Trump, in my opinion. And Trump at least considered the idea of pardoning Assange. There were at least people that Trump listened to who wanted Assange pardoned. That's not the case with Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis would have the same personnel problems, probably even worse, because there would be no like type Stephen Miller types. There'd be no John McEntee types. There would all be standard weird conservative types running his administration, and you just really can't trust them in a way that there were terrible hires in Trump's administration, yes, obviously, but there are at least really good hires in the Trump administration, and a lot of the newer hires were doing a much better job at implementing the agenda Trump ran on in 2016, at least when it came to immigration. I mean, immigration was reduced significantly during Trump's administration. You can't argue that. The other big problem with DeSantis is he has no charisma. He does not have charisma. And people get really mad when I point out this on Twitter. They're like, I don't care about charisma. I just want people who can get things done. How dare you say somebody should be interesting to listen to? It's like they imagine some guy could go up there, hello, I support immigration restriction, and then people go, wow, we just care about policies. Like, thinking that people vote in elections based on policies rather than personality and who's more interesting and exciting is a really autistic way of looking at politics, and it's completely inaccurate. Like, people don't just sit there as like, I'm going through his healthcare policy, I'm going through all these other policies, these are really well stated, much more so than the other candidate. No, it's based on like feeling, on the candidate's personality, their ability to charisma. If you do not have charisma, you cannot be this base populist dictator. Imagine Mussolini having a boring personality. It's like, well, and all the people having to defend it is like, well, he may be a terrible public speaker, but he's got good policies. Like, he would not, Mussolini would not have been in that position. It's the same with like any other strongman leader that people like admire. Like, imagine like Napoleon or all these other figures just like being completely incapable of giving public speeches and just like being really boring and everyone falling asleep. Like, and all these populist think types love Huey Long, and it's primarily due to his charisma. Imagine Huey Long without any charisma, just like being Ron DeSantis, reading canned lines. Like, no one would give a shit about Huey Long. He would have never been elected governor. And it's the same with, like, DeSantis. It's like DeSantis cannot electrify a crowd like Trump can. He really does rely on his note cards. What he says is good, but when he does his TV interviews, he's, like, really trying hard. He knows he does not have natural charisma. He knows he has a weird voice. And listen to Ron DeSantis talk. He does have I can't complain. I mean, even though all these people are listening to my voice right now, I will admit that I do not have, the incredible voice of a Donald Trump or something. But, I'm also not somebody aiming to run for president in 2024. So he has that, weird voice. And there's just like all these factors. He cannot be that type of populist leader you want. He's good at governor. He's good at what he'd be. He'd probably even be a fine vice presidential nominee with Trump. Like, I'd probably be very happy with Trump, DeSantis 2024. But elevating him to this caudillo myth is just so at odds with reality and with the real world that it's just idiotic. And all the people who are promoting it are never Trumpers and people with nefarious ulterior motives that we should note and be skeptical of and be aware of, and wonder why they're so excited about DeSantis. Now, that's enough about DeSantis. Of course, I talk about DeSantis like every other podcast versus Trump, but I'll leave it at that. I'll talk about the Youngkin and the electability thing. This will go in with DeSantis. Thinking Youngkin can win in a 2024 primary is, there's always this thing like where people think about, generic general election matches, and they think that the most moderate person could do really well in a general election. But in order to get to a general election, you have to win the primary. And there's so many people who would theoretically do well in a general election match. Like Larry Hogan, I mean, if he somehow ever won a Republican primary, he probably would do all right in a Republican general election. So would a lot of other people. I mean, you could have even theoretically said Jeb Bush would have somehow done okay in a general election. I don't even know about that. The fact that he got bullied by every other candidate, I think Hillary Clinton would have still won in that scenario. But there's also this thing is that, those type of candidates don't electrify the base to turn out. Now, the base, of course, turned out in record numbers for Youngkin in that, but that was due to such hostility to Democrats and living under blue tyranny in Virginia that they're just like, we've had enough. We're coming out in droves to support this guy. And this guy is showing some concern for us. But if he operates as a governor like Larry Hogan, there is no way in hell he can win a primary. And if you don't have that base support, if they're like bored by you or not really enthused, and if they see you as no different from the Democrat, they're going to stay home. And we saw this in Georgia, the Georgia Senate runoffs. They felt like these Republicans did not care about the issues, that they were just wanting to move on from Trump, that they weren't very loyal, and they stayed home. They did not like that this would have served McConnell's interests. So they stayed home and felt their vote wasn't going to count. And, if they're voting for somebody who's only mildly different from the Democrat, they may vote for, they may not even show up to vote. And you have to look at this thing as like about like electability. It's like everyone always says that DeSantis is more electable. Trump does way better in head-to-head polls against Biden and Kamala and Buttigieg than DeSantis does. And people will say like, well, people don't know who DeSantis is. But, DeSantis is one of the more well-known governors. It's not like he's some obscure congressman that no one has heard of. Like, he has talked about a lot. He has a lot of name recognition. Of course, not as much as Trump, not as much as Pence, not as much as Biden and Kamala, but he has a lot of name recognition. He is in the same league of a lot of these major political figures, and he is not doing well in polls. And people are like, well, he just needs to be introduced to the public. It's like, people already know. And I think it's that, he just doesn't have that captivating personality that Trump does, and that's leading to the thing and to the poll numbers. And Youngkin is just so boring and generic. He was perfect for Virginia, but as a national candidate, he would not do well. And I think he is going to operate the state much more conservatively than any Democrat would, but much more liberally than a lot of other Republican governors. And a lot of people are going to be disappointed. And he's going to have no shot in 2024. And it's like, who cares about electability? What we should care about is whether the person who best represents our interests can win. We want nationalism. We want a nationalist in the White House. Who cares if it's like this moderate who doesn't really care about the issues you care about is more electable. Who gives a shit? Like, we want somebody who's going to represent our issues in the White House. Electability is not the primary concern. The primary concern is getting somebody with our beliefs who can change this country and take it back for the real American people. That's what we care about, not about electability. So I think that is like a silly issue to obsess over. But Conservative Inc. is way more conservative about electability than liberals are. Liberals don't give a shit about electability. Like, they always just vote for whoever they want. Like, there was electability concerns about Barack Obama. He got the nomination anyway, and he won twice. And they weren't even caring, even with electability concerns here. Like, and now they even say like electability is a racist or a sexist dog whistle. So they don't give a shit about it. But Conservative Inc. obsesses over it, and that's why we end up with boring candidates and terrible candidates like John McCain and Mitt Romney. Stop worrying about electability and start worrying about getting the person who best represents your interests, which was what Republicans did in 2016. So that's it for the topic. I'm going to knock out two brief topics before we get to the final cognitive elite question. First thing is there was an incredible moment in New York City this week when the new New York Police Commissioner, who's a black woman, her name escapes me. It doesn't matter. She was sworn in at some public facility where there was a mural of all these black radicals behind her, which include Assata Shakur, who's a cop killer, Angela Davis, who is involved in terrorist activity, black terrorist activity, Nat Turner, who's most famous for butchering white women and children in his slave revolt in 1831, Malcolm X, no introduction needed. I think there's like a few more people but that's like who she was being sworn in front of. And it is a great image. I don't know if it's like a great, but it's a telling image that in New York City, this same city that removed Thomas Jefferson from its city hall is now having its police commissioner sworn in front of black revolutionaries who are all anti-white and promoted violence. And those are the new founding fathers. I said that on Twitter. It's like, these are the new founding fathers. Like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, James Madison, you're out of here. you are gone. What is now in is Malcolm X and Nat Turner. And Nat Turner even has his own honor with this new statue that they put up in Virginia to replace the Lee statue. Is that they have this, I think it's Freedom and Emancipation, or Emancipation and Freedom statue, which is all honoring these Virginians who helped end slavery. They're all black. And they include Nat Turner and another guy who tried to leave a slave rebellion. So people are probably going to see Nat Turner as a bigger hero than George Washington. And Nat Turner's primary achievement is butchering white women and children as they slept. And that's the honor. But he did it good because he's fighting against oppression. So I think that this storyline is just encapsulates what America is. And that's like the future of America is like once we remove all our history and heritage. And as I've said time and time before, they're not going to, and many other people have said, it's not just going to end at Confederates. It's going to go after all white heroes and white figures, and they're going to wipe them out. That's the purpose of the 1619 Project. It's to demonize and villain and turn whites into the villains of American history and turn non-whites into the heroes and protagonists of history. And that's where we're led to the point of public officials who are supposed to represent everyone being sworn in front of black radicals who call for the mass murder of whites. And that's it on this matter. Maybe more further thoughts on it, but I just really wanted to point out how much of how much this event illustrates our current moment at this time. Now time for the final Cognitive Elite question. And I'm going to give another reminder about Cognitive Elite because we want everyone to sign up for Highly Respected's IQ supplements. But if you go for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected's IQ or Highly Respected Substack, you get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics for Highly Respected. And you can do this if you sign up at highlyrespected.substack.com. This question comes from TR. He asked, Scott, or you actually just wanted to know about my opinion on country music. And this is worth its own IQ supplement, so I'm going to be pretty brief here. I have been meaning to do an IQ supplement on country music. It is really worth a lengthy exploration, which is beyond the purview of this particular podcast episode. But I like country music. It is not, I wouldn't say that in my private time when I'm in my car or, when I'm at home that I'm going to really crank up country music. Sometimes I'm in the mood for it, but it's not necessarily that type of music that I'm going to enjoy in my spare time, but I really enjoy it in social settings. I think it's like the best music for social settings when you're at a bar or just hanging out with friends. It's great to put on good country music, and it really is the music of the folk of America, and it's generally good and wholesome. There are negative aspects about it, mainly that a lot of the lyrics are really beta. It's like a man just like crying over a woman who left him, and that's like half of country music, and you're just like, I don't really like to listen to that. It's like feeling like, you're hearing this stuff and you're just like, I'd much rather listen to a song about, a guy fighting demonic possession or a horror movie or, some epic story of Vikings like raiding and stuff that's like in metal. Like it's like way more uplifting and empowering. And even a lot of the older country, stuff like, Hank Williams Sr. and Roy Acuff. That stuff's like really especially depressing. And it's like, especially with like Roy Acuff, like Hank Williams, like he's describing all these like depressing stories and stuff about heartbreak and wanting to kill himself. But it's like tongue in cheek. It's like, oh, haha, your listeners like, oh, well, that's so funny with that. But with Roy Acuff, it's like no laughing matter what's happening. You're like listening to this like family deaths and stuff, and you're like, this is pretty grim. In a way that like metal, of course I always bring up metal. I mean, it's like my main genre and that's what I compare everything with. Metal, when even it has like depressing or grim lyrics, it's still like empowering, or it's like, you're in a fantasy setting and it fits the music, it's like epic, or it's like awesome that this is happening or whatever, no matter how depressing it is. But with like country music, it's like you listen to a guy like pour out his troubles to you, and it's the real classic country, and then you're just sitting there, you're like, yeah. Oh man, that's terrible to hear about. But that's what like all the music is, and if you like listening to more than an hour of it, you're just like, I need to turn this off. I need some more empowering music. I need some more powerful music than this. This is a little too depressing. And so with that regard, but I'm like positive about country. Like one difference between it and folk is it's like doesn't really evoke like historical or like heroic traditions like a lot of other folk music. Like it's not singing about any great heroes or stuff. Like there are like American folk songs that do that, but country music doesn't really do that. But when you compare it to like similar folk music or like the like popular like down home music for like rural or conservative people in other countries, it's way better. If you've ever listened to Schlager from like, which is Germany, which is like their type of country music, you would say, or something comparable, man, it is terrible. Like it is so bad, like Schlager. Like you're just like, oh man, this is not good. Or polka and stuff like that. You're like, this is goofy and unlistenable. Like who listens to this? While country is much more enjoyable to listen. The lyrics are another matter, but yeah, I like country. It's good in social settings. I enjoy it. It's a music that a lot of younger guys should listen to rather than rap. But that's another subject. I will delve deeper into country and what it's about, and its history its roots, its meanings and themes and various developments in an IQ supplement on its own in the near future, so be on the lookout for that. But that is all the time we have for Highly Respected today. I hope everyone has a very Merry Christmas, and we say Merry Christmas on Highly Respected. We are fighting the war on Christmas from this podcast, so we say Merry Christmas, and thank God Trump allowed us to say Merry Christmas again when he was president. Even though the Democrats may try to outlaw it again, we're going to keep fighting the good fight on that. So with that in mind, Merry Christmas, and until next time, stay respected.